Well, I watched a video by a good YouTuber I've been following for a while called Will's Easy Guitar. I believe he's in the San Diego area. Really interesting chap, probably one of the better YouTubers for all-round guitar, from making to repairing to restoring to parts to woods. Just a fountain of knowledge. I really appreciate his channel. I recently watched a video chronicling his disappointment with a sale on Reverb, and thought I would give my take on, since I've been doing this a while, on eBay versus Reverb, and why I've sort of switched from eBay to Reverb in terms of selling, but I tend to buy more still from eBay. I think it's an interesting development over the last few years. I was one of the original sellers on eBay, sold on eBay for many years, had good times. I used to enjoy it. I used to sell violins, cellos, guitars, mandolins, anything with strings, and lots of other things as well. And it really worked for me, and I hear this from a lot of old-time sellers as well. Over the last few years, eBay has become very, almost hideously seller-friendly, and skewed their policies towards protecting the seller protecting the buyer-friendly. To the point where it's detrimental to the seller, and I'll tell you what I mean. In the old days, you'd sell something, they'd have a certain amount of time, a buyer would have a certain amount of time to check it out. If there's an issue, they go through a process and you deal with it. It was clean. And then they slowly started shifting the policies to where the buyer could retain the instrument for a lot longer, joyride it, play it, beat it up, ding it up, break strings, and then when they get bored, when the new PlayStation game comes out, force a return on you. And that's another thing about eBay, is once you get into a dispute, you're going to lose if you're a seller. They will back the buyer in the end. And you know, there's a lot of dodgy sellers on eBay. A lot of them really make me mad because they make it a disreputable place for everyone else, for good sellers. So I understand you've got to protect the buyer to a point, and I am a buyer in a lot of situations, so I appreciate it to a point, but it got to the point where it became abusive, and you could be a perfectly good seller, offer good items, and get completely abused on eBay. In a number of ways. One is the forced return, keeping your item, dinging it up. And then eBay started a policy where when something is sent back to you, as soon as you sign for it, or as soon as it's delivered through the mail company, they issue the refund. And I heard stories of people getting bricks in the mail, of people getting a different item back in the mail. And as soon as it crosses the threshold and is signed for, the refund goes into effect. And then eBay changed their feedback and rating policies, and there's a lot of feedback abuse, feedback bombing, stuff like that. And I found that the procedures for going through appeals in those situations were skewed towards the buyer as well. Then they initiated some kind of points thing where you get your account shut down, or you become a low-rated seller and you can't post as much. It's really, it became really like a penal system almost for sellers. And a lot of sellers I knew that were good sellers got into trouble just over 2 or 3 really difficult customers that stuck it to them and dragged their ratings down. So I didn't like that the way it was going. So I stopped selling on eBay. I sell only once in a while Only specific items that I think would do better on there. But I don't sell instruments on eBay that much anymore. I switched to Reverb, and Reverb is not as well traveled. It's still up and coming. It too has issues. The sales are never as numerous as they were on eBay, so you have to be extremely patient. But I find eBay to be sort of that mom and pop, up and coming, developing. It's music instruments only. It's like an eBay for musicians. And in situations I've had with difficult buyers, they handle it well. They seem to handle it well. Now the situation with Will is that he was out of town for I think 9 days, and after 7 days, they can no longer. They have a policy that you can no longer dispute a purchase after that amount of time. And of course, the seller in that situation used that as a loophole, and Will could not get due process. Although I think he handled it badly by letting the situation disintegrate to name calling and swearing, and all these sites will come out against you if you do that. If you get abusive and personal, you're not going to do well any of these sites, trust me. It's best to maintain dignity at all times and not get into an exchange of personal insults. That's what happened, so the decision went against him. But even though it was unfortunate in that case, I like the 7-day policy. It shuts down that joyriding and forced return situation that I found to happen on eBay all the time. I think they're a little bit more even-handed in supporting sellers and buyers on Reverb. And also they handle, the process is handled slightly different depending on payment. So if somebody pays with PayPal, they can go through the due process for PayPal, and PayPal has its own appeals situation. But if somebody pays direct with a credit card, then the the rules that come with purchasing with credit cards comes into effect. So you have a bit more protection as a seller to abusive buyers, people trying to con, force discounts, force returns, return different items, damaged items, things like that. That's not to say it's often the buyer's fault. I think there are a lot of abusive sellers as well, and I realize why these things are in place to support the buyer. I am a buyer in many situations, and if something's not represented properly, I will write the buyer and say, look, your listing said this was in new condition. It's not. These are the issues. Here's the photos. And in 9 times out of 10, they'll say, okay, how are we going to handle this? Do you want a partial discount? Do you want to send it back? And it goes rather cleanly, because a lot of people who list guitars are not luthiers, they're not experts, they don't see little details, they don't see warped necks, they don't see bad nut slots, they don't see little minute cracks in the neck and things like that. They're not trained, their eyes aren't trained. If a guitar looks alright, they put it in a box and they ship it. So a lot of times you will find issues. Also, you should not be buying on any of those sites, either Reverb or eBay, if you either cannot set up guitars or you don't have access to somebody who can. Because no matter how well something's represented or listed or pictured or photoed or shipped or packed or insured, there are always going to be discrepancies between what you think you're going to get and what you get. I would never advise anyone, a layperson or just a player with no setup skills, to buy online. I would say buy on Craigslist, where you can play the guitar, go to a guitar shop where you can play the guitar, buy from someone like me who sets up the guitar before selling it. Never buy blind online, but if you are somebody that can do the work or can get somebody to do the work, of course there are a lot of good deals to be had on those two sites. So eBay for a seller has become less rewarding. I find it difficult. I think they've slackened off in the last few months. Their sort of punitive treatment of sellers with this, strike or points deduction thing, which is treating sellers like high school kids. I think they lost a lot of sellers in the last few years. I think they've sort of scaled back that whole thing. But still, it's the fees, some of the policies that are left are still not to the point that they were, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Selling on Reverb is much more simpler, it's easier to list. The problem with Reverb is that it's great if you want to buy a Martin or really nice guitars. A lot of professional sellers, a lot of guitar shops, a lot of the early eBay sellers, luthiers, people who restore instruments have switched to Reverb. You can buy stuff on there and find really good instruments. I think it's a bit more expensive. I think the prices are a bit higher. I think it's better for mid and higher range instruments. As far as bargains go, or the let's say the entry-level guitar stuff, I think people are charging a little bit too high on that site. I don't find as many bargains per se on Reverb. I tend to see a lot of people selling too close to retail, particularly for used or seconds or blems or things like that. eBay, of course, is better for finding bargain instruments, but there again, you've got to be able to fix them, you've got to be able to work on them and remedy them when you get them, and also you've got to be prepared for certain shenanigans on both sides of the equation. I get a guitar like this, which is a Ariana. It's made by Aria. It's fairly decent. It's simple. It's entry-level acoustic electric with their patented preamp on there. However, when I got this from an eBay seller, the setup was horrendous. I just about got it remedied with a truss rod adjustment. I had to do some saddle work as the keys were a bit sticky and faulty. None of this was mentioned in the ad because the seller probably is not a guitar player. It's probably could be somebody selling their kid's guitar they never played. Or a lot of times I see pawn shops selling on eBay. I see small businesses that don't get enough walk-in traffic selling on there, and they're not usually music instrument specialists. So they don't know if the action is right. They don't know if the angle of the neck is right a lot of times. Of course, there are sellers that do deliberately are dishonest and do deliberately try to fool you. I think most people are just not savvy to all the workings and machinations of a musical instrument, so they just list it. And of course, if they don't represent something right, you can contact them and say, if I'd have known this was wrong with this guitar, I wouldn't have paid this amount for it. And then they're in a situation where they can offer you a partial discount. Or they can do a refund, they can sell it to someone else. I hate refunds, so I always set up everything I sell. I try to make it play as nice as I can. I don't want them coming back. I've got so much to work on. I don't like dealing with disputes, so I try to make everything as playable and as nice as possible. But I'm a luthier, I have training. So I can do that. Not everyone can do that. Another thing is things can shift. I'm in Colorado. It's very dry here. Same with the whole West, California, the desert states. And as the wood dries out, the action might change. You might get a little fret buzzing. A small shift in atmosphere can change the dynamics of a guitar. So it's not always the seller's fault. It's just something coming from, let's say, a more humid environment to a drier environment, or vice versa. and it slightly changes the physics of a guitar setup. You got to be prepared for that if you're buying online. You've got to be ready to do a little bit of work, and not, you know, sort of like send something back over something that can be shipped, something that can be dealt with fairly easily. So, yeah, those are the trials and tribulations of dealing with eBay and Reverb. If you are not a tech or a luthier, or do not have access to one, or don't want to pay for one, don't buy there. You know, buy somewhere where you can go play it, or there's good used market on Craigslist as well. That's where I actually sell most of my guitars, because people like to have them in their hands. I don't blame them. I think that's the optimal scenario. So as far as Reverb goes, I like it, I support it, I want it to do well, I want it to become the preeminent marketplace for selling instruments. So even though I don't sell as well on there, I still keep listings on there because you know, I like the enterprise and I wanted to see it grow. eBay I've seen for a while as dying. I think it'll struggle on for a few more years yet. It's great for picking up you know, stuff at good prices to work on, and I always buy budget stuff on there that I can set up and work on. So they're slightly different. You know, I like the smaller aspect of Reverb. It feels more like a sort of a small business still. You know, you get to know the names of the reps. You get the same ones answering when you have queries. If you call them up, you often get the person that you were dealing with on their little chat thing. Whereas eBay, anyone that's done the eBay customer service thing will tell you it's horrendous. It's no fun at all. I try to avoid it as much as possible. I had to go through that process a few times, and it's just as bad as dealing with DirecTV or Comcast or any of those places that I have cut out of my life, thankfully, who have the absolute most abysmal customer service ethics and do nothing for their customers. eBay's gotten a bit like that. So you know, I only deal with it where necessary. I buy on there because I can fix things. I wouldn't buy on there if I couldn't. And I don't sell on there very much anymore because I find that their policies make it more difficult to do so. So I hope you find that helpful. It's a bit of a long rant, but I often get asked about the you know why I do have switched to one and why I don't sell as much on the other. So I thought I'd do a little chat on it. Okay, see you next time.